The dining table was set for 8. Mom had made her famous roast chicken, the one she only prepared for special occasions. My brother Ethan sat at Dad's right hand, chest puffed out like he'd just won the lottery. His wife Jennifer kept glancing at me with barely concealed satisfaction. I should have known something was coming. "Thank you all for being here," Dad said, standing with his wine glass. "We have an important announcement. As you know, your mother and I are getting older. We need to think about the future." Aunt Margaret nodded from across the table. Uncle Paul set down his fork. "We've decided to transfer the house to Ethan," Dad continued. "He's established, he has a family, he needs the space. It's time." Ethan grinned. "Thanks, Dad. We really appreciate it. The kids will love having a yard this big." "Now Vanessa," Dad turned to me, "you've been living in the guest house for 3 years. That's been fine, but with this transition you'll need to find your own place. We're giving you until Sunday. That's 5 days. Plenty of time." I took a sip of wine. "Sunday. Don't make this difficult," Mom added. "You're 32. You should have your own place by now anyway. We've been very generous letting you stay here." "Very generous," I agreed. Jennifer leaned forward. "We're planning to renovate the guest house into a playroom for the kids. We've already contacted contractors." "How efficient," I said. Dad frowned at my calm tone. "I expected more resistance from you." "Why would I resist?" "Because you've been living here rent-free for 3 years," Ethan said. "Most people would be upset about being kicked out." "Kicked out of where exactly?" I asked. "The guest house," Dad said impatiently. "We just explained this." "Right. The guest house." I pulled out my phone. "The 1,200 square foot guest house with 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, full kitchen and separate entrance." "Yes, that one," Mom said. "You need to pack your things." "Interesting." I scrolled through my phone. "And you're giving this house to Ethan?" "The main house." "That's what we just said," Ethan snapped. "Are you drunk? You're acting weird." I set down my wine glass. "I'm acting appropriately for someone who just heard her family try to give away property they don't own." The table went quiet. "What are you talking about?" Dad's voice had an edge now. "I'm talking about ownership. Legal ownership." I pulled up a document on my phone. "This house, the main house where we're sitting right now, who do you think owns it?" "We do," Mom said. "Your father and I bought it 30 years ago." "You bought it 30 years ago, yes. You took out a mortgage for $180,000. I scrolled down. "You made payments for 23 years. Then 7 years ago you fell behind. Way behind. You owed $67,000 in back payments plus penalties. The bank started foreclosure proceedings." Dad's face reddened. "We handled that." "You handled it by asking me for help. I was 25, working in pharmaceutical sales. I just had my best year. Made $340,000 in commissions. You said you needed a loan to save the house. And you gave it to us," Mom said defensively. "We're grateful." "I didn't give you a loan," I interrupted. "I bought the house. I paid off the mortgage, $67,000 to the bank, and purchased the property from you for $120,000. Total investment, $187,000. We signed papers. We went to a title company. I have the deed." Ethan laughed. "That's bullshit. You don't own this house." I pulled up the county assessor's website, typed in the address and held up my phone. "Owner of record, Vanessa Morrison. Purchase date, 7 years ago. Property taxes, paid by Vanessa Morrison annually." Uncle Paul grabbed my phone, staring at the screen. His eyebrows shot up. "Holy shit. Let me see that," Dad demanded. I handed him the phone. He scrolled through the county records, his face cycling through confusion, shock and then rage. "This is a mistake," he said. "Some clerical error." "It's not an error. I have the original deed at my attorney's office. I have the title insurance. I have every tax payment for 7 years. I own this house, Dad." "Not you." "But we've been living here," Mom whispered. "For 7 years. You let us think. I let you live here because you're my parents. I charged you $500 a month in rent, way below market rate, and I never made a big deal about it because I didn't want to embarrass you." "Rent." Mom's voice rose. "You've been charging us rent to live in our own house?" High house, I corrected. And yes, $500 a month for a 4-bedroom house is incredibly cheap. Market rate would be $3,500. Jennifer was scrolling furiously on her phone. The assessor's website says the current value is $680,000. Closer to $720,000 based on recent comparables, I said. I've been monitoring it. Ethan stood up abruptly. This is insane. You can't own the house. You work in medical sales. Pharmaceutical sales. Medical devices specifically. I'm a regional director now. Last year I made $480,000. I took another sip of wine. The guest house you want to turn into a playroom? I bought that separately 3 years ago from the neighbors. Cost me $215,000. It wasn't part of this property originally, it was on the adjacent lot. I purchased it, had the lot lines redrawn and combined the properties. Aunt Margaret was shaking her head slowly. You've owned both properties this whole time? Yes. The main house for 7 years, the guest house for 3. Why didn't you tell us? Dad demanded. I did tell you. When I bought the main house I explained everything. You signed the papers. You just chose not to remember because it was easier to think of this as your house, that I was visiting rather than my house, that you were renting. We would never have agreed to that, Mom said. You were about to be foreclosed on. You had no choice. I pulled out a folder from my bag. I'd brought it anticipating this conversation eventually. Here's the original purchase agreement with both your signatures. Here's the deed transfer. Here's the closing statement. I spread the papers across the dinner table on top of Mom's good tablecloth. Dad picked up the purchase agreement, reading it slowly. His hands were shaking. So you're saying, Ethan said carefully, that you own this entire property. Both houses. That's exactly what I'm saying. And you've been letting us think it was still Dad's house? I've been letting you believe whatever you wanted to believe. I've been living in my guest house on my property while collecting below market rent from my parents in my main house. That seemed like a reasonable arrangement. Then why are we having this dinner? Jennifer asked. Why did they think they could give the house to Ethan? Because they forgot. Or they convinced themselves it wasn't real. Or they decided that family property should go to the son, not the daughter. I looked at Dad. Which is it? Dad set down the purchase agreement. We didn't forget. We just thought, after all this time, you'd understand that family is more important than paperwork. Paperwork like a legal deed? You know what I mean. Ethan has kids. He needs space. You're single, you don't need all this. So you decided to give away my property without asking me? We were going to discuss compensation. Mom started. After you already announced the transfer? After you told me to get out by Sunday? I shook my head. That's not a discussion. That's a fait accompli. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it, a text from my attorney, David, 5 minutes out. Perfect timing. Here's what's actually going to happen, I said. I'm keeping both properties. They're mine, they stay mine. You can continue living in the main house under our current rental agreement. $500 a month. Or you can move out and I'll rent it at market rate to someone else. You'd kick out your own parents? Mom's eyes filled with tears. You just tried to kick me out of my own property and give it to Ethan. So yes, if necessary I would. This is unbelievable, Ethan said. You've been lying to us for years. I haven't lied about anything. You never asked who owned the property. You assumed it was Dad's because that fit your worldview better. The doorbell rang. Everyone froze. That'll be David, I said, standing. My real estate attorney. I asked him to stop by with some documents. I walked to the front door and opened it. David stood there in slacks and a polo shirt holding his leather briefcase. He'd come straight from the golf course. Vanessa, good to see you. He followed me into the dining room. Sorry to interrupt dinner. Perfect timing actually. David, this is my family. Everyone, this is David Chin, my attorney. David set his briefcase on the sideboard and pulled out a folder. I brought the documents you requested. Updated property deeds for both parcels, showing clear title in your name. Tax payment records. Rental agreements. He glanced at Dad. Also the original purchase agreement from 7 years ago, certified copies. Why do we need certified copies? Dad asked weakly. Because Vanessa mentioned there might be some confusion about ownership. These remove any ambiguity. David pulled out another document. I also brought an updated rental agreement for your review. The current $500 monthly rate is significantly below market value. If you'd like to continue the arrangement, we can extend the lease for another year at the same rate. Otherwise, we'll need to discuss either a market rate increase or transition. Transition, Ethan said. You mean kicking them out? I mean standard rental practices, David said calmly. Vanessa has been extraordinarily generous with the below-market rate. But if the property is going to be treated as an investment, which it legally is, then market rates apply. Mom was crying openly now. Aunt Margaret handed her a tissue. I don't understand, Mom said. Why are you doing this? I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm protecting what's mine. You're the ones who decided to give away my property. You're the ones who told me to get out by Sunday. I'm just clarifying the reality of the situation. Dad stood up, his face hard. If you'd been a better daughter, we wouldn't have needed to take these steps. If I'd been a better daughter? Kept my voice level. I saved your house from foreclosure. I gave you 7 years of below-market rent. I bought and renovated the guest house. I've paid for repairs, property taxes, insurance. What exactly should I have done differently? You should have understood that family takes care of family, Dad said. Not charge rent like some landlord. I am a landlord. I'm your landlord. That's the legal relationship here. Ethan picked up his keys. Come on, Jennifer. We're leaving. Good idea, I said. Since you were planning to renovate my guest house without my permission, I should probably change the locks. Ethan stopped at the door. You're going to regret this. I doubt it. After they left, the remaining family members sat in uncomfortable silence. Uncle Paul cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Vanessa, I think you're handling this correctly. They overstepped. Thank you, Uncle Paul. Aunt Margaret nodded. I didn't know you'd bought the property. That was smart of you. Dad glared at them both. Whose side are you on? The side of legal ownership, Uncle Paul said. Which is Vanessa's side. David closed his briefcase. Vanessa, I'll leave these documents with you. Call me if you need anything else. He nodded to the room. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. After he left, I sat back down at the table. My wine glass was still half full. Mom's roast chicken was getting cold. So, I said, do you want to sign the lease extension or should I start looking for new tenants? They signed the lease extension. They had no choice. Moving would cost thousands and they'd been counting on Ethan taking over the property, not having to find somewhere else. Ethan didn't speak to me for 2 months. Then his lease came up for renewal on his apartment and he realized he couldn't afford to buy in the current market. He called asking if maybe we could work something out regarding the main house. You mean the house you were going to get for free? I asked. I didn't know it was yours, he said. Dad told me it was his to give. And you never thought to verify that? Silence. The house isn't available, I said. Mom and Dad are living there under lease. When they eventually move out, if they move out, I'll decide what to do with it then. So you're punishing me? No, I'm making business decisions about my property. There's a difference. He hung up. 3 months after the dinner, Mom called. We've been thinking. Maybe we should buy the house from you. Pay you back. It's not for sale. But if it was. It's not. And even if it was, the price would be market rate. $720,000. Can you afford that? She couldn't. 6 months later, Dad had a health scare. Nothing serious but enough to remind everyone of mortality. He called me from the hospital. I've been thinking about the house situation, he said. And maybe you were right. Maybe I didn't remember the details correctly. You remembered fine. You just didn't like the details. Will you forgive me? I considered that. I'll continue renting to you at $500 a month. I'll continue covering major repairs. I'll continue treating you like family who happens to rent from me. But I won't pretend that you didn't try to give away my property. I won't pretend the dinner never happened. That's fair, he said quietly. It wasn't forgiveness, not really. But it was acknowledgement. And sometimes that's enough. A year after the dinner, I sold the guest house, the one Jennifer wanted to turn into a playroom. Sold it for $340,000 to a young couple with a baby. Used the profit to buy a condo downtown closer to my office. Mom asked why I was moving. Because I'm tired of living on the same property where my family tried to steal from me, I said simply. She didn't have a response to that. I still own the main house. Mom and Dad still live there, still pay $500 a month. We have dinner occasionally, polite and distant. Ethan bought a townhouse last year, stretching himself financially to do it. He mentioned at Christmas that he wished he'd handled things differently. You wished you'd verified ownership before assuming you were getting a free house? I asked. Something like that. The real estate lawyer hadn't just walked in with documents that night. He'd walked in with reality. With proof that assumptions aren't ownership. That announcements aren't transfers. That family isn't an excuse to take what isn't yours. Dad had said, get out by Sunday. But you can't evict an owner from their own property. The deed arrived, was already there, had been there for 7 years. And their faces turned pale when they realized the truth. The house they tried to give away had never been theirs to give.